Hi, everybody. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how to design effective lessons. And let me share my screen. Okay, so today's competencies are based on how to tap into your multilingual learners' background experiences and language proficiencies to develop effective lessons. And we're also going to draw on the information that we covered with the fields of linguistics and how those apply to developing effective lessons. So I recommend referring to our class materials from day 3, where we discussed linguistics and how those apply to language acquisition in classroom settings. I also suggest looking at the materials from day 5 and 9 on the language proficiencies and language domains. That information is going to help you with today's content. So the first thing that I want to discuss is how to, when designing effective lessons, is how to draw on students' background knowledge in that process. And to me, when you talk about background knowledge, I have been very impressed with the way teachers are able to scaffold their students' academic background knowledge and experiences and connect those to classroom lessons. Now, the next step then is to look at how your students' personal background knowledge can be integrated into those lessons too, and that gets a little more tricky, especially when you're looking at multilingual students, and when you consider that they have a wealth of background knowledge from our personal lives that you can tap into, but you also have to think about their linguistic background knowledge, and look at how to integrate their understanding of language, their types of language use, and their proficiencies, and how those can be leveraged to enhance your actual teaching. So that brings us to the notion of getting out there and learning about your students and their lives on a deeper level, and understanding how the skills and activities and experiences they have are valuable and can be applied in classroom settings. And that's really going to be the emphasis that we take over the next semester, actually 2 semesters in the fall and spring, on personalizing our individualizing our instruction, and really focusing on those skills to help students and enhance their academic experiences. And that leads us to the concept of the funds of knowledge that we've discussed, you've read about. This isn't my concept, obviously. I just use it as a foundational component of most everything that I do, that I write about. And it helps teachers, in my experience, it helps teachers understand the difference between tapping into, what they have learned academically about, math formulas or geography, or, writing a sentence in a classroom setting, right? And helps them understand that the students have these amazing experiences or very deep, rich experiences that can be used as, building blocks for connecting to classroom content. It also helps us understand that the students' experiences are very, impactful in the way that they shape the students' understanding of their position in the world, of how they relate to others, and their situation within the broader social context, and then how that all boils down to classroom instruction. So again, this is going to be a concept that we draw on over the next 2 semesters when we're planning out lessons and working with students individually. So the next component of effective lessons has to do with being intentional about your instruction. And, this is where we circle back to your teacher prep program and content objectives or learning targets or whatever, they were called back then. And being more mindful of how we can use these as a fundamental tool. And so I in my experience, veteran teachers have a very good idea of what their content objective is, what they're trying to get across, and when they design lessons. Are those clear to the students? Well, that's a different question that we'll come back to in a minute. But yeah, I enjoy working with veteran teachers and hearing how they come up with their content objectives. And how they relate to standards, Common Core standards, Common Core state standards, or whatever. But then to loop back and talk about, well, okay, you got a content objective. Now, what's the language objective? And that's where it gets a little tricky, because some teachers struggle to see the difference between the two. And if you can think about setting up a content objective in terms of what you want your students to learn about your content of the lesson, and now take a step sideways and think, all right, now I'm going to also come up with a language objective so that I can target specific features of my students' language use to enhance their language development. Those are two different things. Okay, so what I like to do is walk through an activity with teachers based on their own content expertise. We have high school, middle school, elementary teachers. So some elementary teachers might teach all content areas. Secondaries might just focus on one. But what I try to have teachers do is think about their content area. And right here I have in this little graphic for an activity, you think math or social studies or science. I don't use language arts in this example because then that can get confusing between language and content. So, when you think about, let's say math, and maybe your objective is to work on, you want students to be able to, add fractions, for example. So great, you want them to be able to add fractions. So that content objective has some sort of activity attached to it. Like, what are you going to actually do in your classroom? What's the activity you're having them do? And so you think through, okay, I'm going to have them do X, right? Even something like a worksheet or something out of their textbook. Or maybe something even more complex where they're using manipulatives and dividing things up and moving things around and talking through it. Whatever it is, great. So whatever the activity is that you're using to accomplish your content objective, think about what the students are doing with language. Okay, are they discussing? Are they reading? Are they writing something out? Are they listening to you? Are they listening to their peers? It's probably a combination of multiple things, right? So regardless, think of what kind of language skills are being used. Now, from there, and this social studies or science or whatever, it doesn't matter. Think about the language skills necessary to accomplish your content objective. Now you can refer back to our basic grid on the language domains, okay? And think about, okay, now I know in my class, I have, maybe 5 multilingual students, and they need support in their productive literacy. Okay, cool. So now you're talking about the productive literacy. You've narrowed it down where that's where they need support. Now your activity is a combination of all of these, but you know that the students in your particular class are having difficulties expressing their understanding of the content, productive literacy. Now, think about an objective that you can create so that you're highlighting productive literacy in within that, some specific component of productive literacy. Okay, so what do you want to accomplish with your students in terms of them writing out what we were doing, math, fractions? Okay. So do you want them to be able to do a formula and then, basic algorithm, and then they have to write out a narrative of each step that they took? Do you want them to use adverbials, right? Like the procedural words, like first, second, third, or next, or whatever. Maybe you want to work on their productive literacy. And so you're going to have them complete the algorithm, maybe with a partner, and then they have to turn and explain orally the steps that they took. Okay. Once you can focus in on a specific skill within your activity, then you can create a language objective that's clear so that the students know what you expect them to do with their language, and that you can evaluate. There's got to be some way that you know whether or not they were able to accomplish that. And so it might seem complex, but once you get used to thinking through your content objective and the activities that you're doing with that content objective, and then what language skills are necessary to complete that, then you can hone in on, a specific domain and emphasize that domain with them and get them to recognize, that they are doing something specific with language to accomplish the goal. And when you do that, even if there are students who aren't multilingual learners, right? English learners, you don't have to highlight that this is for the English learners. That can be highlighted for everybody. And so everybody just knows that there's something that they're going to be using language with that they need to think about, whether it's description or that they're understanding, their comprehension, or they're writing something or reading something. And there's a way that they know whether or not that they accomplished that. And then you can think back, okay, especially for the purpose of today in today's competency evaluation. So when you think about your objectives and the way that students are using language, can you identify like the different linguistic components that are necessary to accomplish that? What challenges are your students facing? Can you highlight a specific linguistic field within those challenges? If you can do that, then writing the language objective, you loop back to it. Okay, let's work on morphology today, right? So today I want to be able to have my students practice past tense constructions of verbs. Well, even if you're a science or math or social, whatever content area, it's like you can have students explain what they did, right? How things were done, and look at those particular constructions morphologically, right? Now, the other thing that I emphasize is displaying your objectives, and this is the area that a lot of teachers struggle with, because it's just so intuitive what they're trying to accomplish. But when you display your objectives, students can always refer back to them, and they can always think, am I doing what my teacher wants me to do? And am I moving towards accomplishing that objective? And so I've had, 15 years, I've had students display objectives in countless ways. And once you display it, this is just a picture of one teacher, elementary, that has, all the content areas, and she has a C and an L, content and language, for each content area. And so the students can always refer to that no matter what time of day, they're in, what content area. And I thought that was great. Now, more importantly, you can use your content and language objectives to bookend your lessons. Okay, so you start out by covering them. And I've seen my students or teachers cover objectives with their students in a number of ways. But whether it's, elbow buddies, think, pair, share, summarizing, rephrasing, but you get students dialed into what the objectives are. Somehow they either tell a partner or they tell you back, and at the beginning of the lesson. Then at the end of your lesson, it takes about 2 minutes, if that, to then wrap up, and you have students refer to the objectives, decide whether or not they met the objective, and how they met it. And so you give the students this meta instructional perspective of, well, did we do it? Yeah. How did we do it? And it's a really neat process. Once you get it going and that becomes part of the routine, it's a neat way to bookend lessons and get students dialed in on what they did and did they accomplish it. If you don't accomplish it, then they say, well, we didn't get to it. Why not? Well, we ran out of time, or something happened, or it also gives them an understanding of the process, right? So I've done this when I subbed in the elementary last time, 5 or 6 years ago. I was math science and my partner was language arts social studies. And so you can see here I had content objectives and language objectives, and this says math, and then the grid down below was science. And it got I did this every day. And so this is 4th grade, so they're a little bit more advanced. But the students then would come in the morning and they wanted to help me create the objectives and write them up on the board. So this was a really neat picture. I wish I had more pictures like this. But these 2 students they're up there. They helped me think through what the objective should be after I told them the content. And then what language skills were necessary. So I don't know, I love this picture just because not only were they so ingrained into the habit of content and language objective, but they actually were helping produce them, before school started. So I thought that was really cool. The next resource I have is from a past student of mine, Yvonne Moore. She's a teacher in Pasco School District, but she did a presentation on language objectives and walks through examples of how to write a language objective, how to post it, how to cover it. It's a great presentation. And so I give all the credit to Yvonne, and I have this posted on Canvas too. So you'll see the PowerPoint that says PowerPoint with language objectives, or presentation on language objectives. So that's a really good resource if you want to refer to that one as well. So, okay, I hope that with the materials we've done in the previous classes and the examples that I gave today, that you can go through the competency evaluation and make those connections.